Hi, I'm Doreen, and this is my mom.
Hello.
And she is a published author, and she's written, one of the books she's got published and is available is called Gifts from Santa, and I thought you'd like to hear a little bit from it. So here we go. Mom's going to read from her book.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Gifts from Santa. Not a children's book. It's for anybody who wants to get into the holiday spirit, and it makes a great gift to give to your friends and loved ones, too. It's a collection of stories that people are telling each other as one young man is caught in a small mountain town, and here's one of the stories that one of the people in there tells. Joe loved to ride the clackety trolley. He would lean up against the big window, pretending he was on an old steam railroad car out in the Old West where cowboys were riding the range, or Indians were hiding in the bushes, or maybe train robbers were lying in wait in the bend up ahead. On one particular trip to town, when as the trolley had stopped to pick up more passengers, Joel's daydreams were interrupted by a large, loud man. The grunt voice came up from behind and came closer as a man dragged a whimpering child by her arm. Another smaller girl followed silently behind them. "Don't give me none of your lip. You'll sit where I want you to sit." He shoved her roughly into an empty seat, then grabbed the other little girl and shoved her in beside the first. Sophie was at first disgusted at the man's loud rudeness. Then she was appalled at what she watched him do to the little girls. A sudden change came over her. Joel could sense something, like when an animal can sense when another animal wants to fight. Her lips were pressed tightly together and her hands were clenched into tiny fists. Sophie slowly rose. She looked down at Joel and his brother. She said, "Stay here." She made her way up the narrow aisle as the car rocked and swayed to the seat where the man had slumped down next to the two girls. "Sir?" Her voice was soft and low. He made no answer. She spoke a bit louder. "Sir!" He groaned. "Sir, I object to the way you are treating these girls." The man's eyes snapped open. "What? That is no way to deal with children." He coughed loudly and stared up at her for several moments as if his eyes hadn't focused yet. Then he rose unsteadily, reeking of sweat and gin. "Lady, who are you to talk to me?" He rose past Sophie's height and kept rising. A big, dirty man, he glared down at her. She didn't flinch. His size, meanness, and drunken cruelty didn't penetrate the anger that boiled deep inside. When she spoke, her voice was calm. "I have raised 5 children in a fine manner and know how to deal with them properly." His voice rose. The words were slurred, and as he yelled, his face drew down toward hers as his beefy hand pointed and jabbed. "You have no right to tell me anything." He reeled backward as he straightened and jabbed a thumb at his chest. "These are my kids. I'll deal with them any way I want. If I think they need a strong hand..." He balled up the fist and shook it in their direction. "That's what I give them." The girls flinched away from him, and he then shook the fist at Sophie. "Now get!" He fell back onto the seat, satisfied that he had thoroughly told off the noisy little biddy, and closed his eyes. Sophie's eyes took him in, and then took in the 2 little girls. Big, wide, terrified eyes looked back at her. She could almost hear their silent pleas. "Don't. Please don't get him any madder." Her heart ripped in two as she saw their fright. The joy and innocence that all children deserve to have had been taken away from these 2. She looked again at the man who was already snoring. Her voice was low again. "We'll just see about that." When the trolley got to town, Sophie and the boys climbed down with the rest of the passengers. Everyone hurried off before the driver had to perform the unpleasant task of waking up the big dirty man. As Sophie and the boys stepped out, instead of going to the grocer's or the dry goods shop as usual, they went directly to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Murphy was behind his desk leafing through papers and looked up with a stern expression that softened when he saw who had come in. "Why, Sophie, you bring the boys for a visit?" She always brought smiles to people wherever they met her. "Well, no, Douglas, I'm here on very important business." She stood before his desk primly, holding her pocketbook with both hands against her chest. One boy stood quietly on either side of her. Sheriff Murphy's expression changed again. He wore a stern look as he looked at the boys. Many times Sophie had brought children into his office to have an official of the law hear about some mischief they had been up to. He would listen with a straight face to Sophie's explanation of what they had done, and then put a little more fright into the trembling little ones as he lectured them. Sophie then took the children away, winking at him as he held back his chuckling. "Sure, Sophie, you have a seat there." He indicated the chair by his desk. "And the boys can have a sit over on the bench." He waved them toward a high-backed wooden bench by a rickety table holding a fan that swept back and forth. As they all took their seats, he watched their manner. They did not seem to be frightened or nervous. Sophie hadn't brought them to him for a lecture. He scratched his cheek and looked at her again. This time, her manner was different. Possibly she did have an important matter for him. There was a look of determination across her face like he never seen before. Well, no, maybe once, when after the stock market crash, when she'd vowed that no one in their town would go hungry, and no one had. She spoke very formally. "Sheriff, a matter has come to my attention I feel you must know about." "Go on." She took a deep breath. "I cannot tolerate this type of thing, and I want every legal procedure to be undertaken." Usually on the ride back to the farm, Sophie and the boys would talk about the folk living there and on farms nearby. She would chatter about who was going to marry who, what the children's school play was like, or whose vegetables were best. Sometimes the boys would sit enthralled at Sophie's stories of steamboats with their gamblers on Lake Chautauqua, or of travels by horse and buggy. But this time the ride back was quiet. Sophie had told them, "I must think about this." They sat silently as the trolley rumbled and clacked along its steel ribbons. When evening was done sliding across the sparkling sky, and Paul had already perched his boot scrub free of mud beside the back door, and was sitting in his chair in the parlor, he listened to Sophie. In his own way he became enraged also. His lips pressed together and his large hands gripped the arms of the chair. A look came into his eyes that would have frightened anyone who did not know his peaceful nature. He listened and nodded at intervals. When she had finished speaking, he sat thinking for several moments. He looked at her. "Your plan is fine, Sophie, fine and sound." He paused for a moment, and each of his palms smacked down on the chair arms. "We'll do it."
Okay, it's actually not intended for small children because it does reveal the true nature of Santa Claus. But it is a very heartwarming book, and it's loaded with touching stories, and it's very good to read, and it definitely gets you into the holiday spirit. So if you have anybody who really loves Christmas or enjoys Christmas stories, or anybody that just enjoys a good collection of stories, it's really fun to read. It's a good collection, and I recommend it very highly, not just because it was written by my mother, but because also it's a very good book. So check it out.
Wonderful stories in here, Gifts from Santa. Book that answers those questions. Is there a Santa Claus, and who is he? You can buy a copy of this. Go online, www.publishamerica.com, or have your bookstore order it. Either way, buy a copy.